This is the 401k Fridays podcast, and I'm your host, Rick Unser. If you're a retirement plan fiduciary or administer your company's retirement plan, you've come to the right spot. Our format is pretty simple. In each episode, we select a timely and informative workplace retirement plan topic, we pick the brain of an expert guest, and provide you the hard-to-find perspective you need to make informed decisions that benefit your plan, your employees, and company. Now here we go with this week's episode. It's hard to believe, but the economic and financial market impact of COVID-19 first materialized about 7 months ago. Since then, we've seen record-breaking market volatility, a huge spike in unemployment, a recession in the U.S. economy, and dramatic changes to daily life and routines. Just ask anybody with kids. With all that said, how are retirement savers weathering the storm? To share some details, I'm excited to welcome back Nathan Voris, a Managing Director of Business Strategy with Charles Schwab Retirement Plan Services. In this role, Nathan is responsible for leading the client experience, platform, and product development strategy to help retirement plan sponsors, consultants, and participants meet their goals. During our conversation, he pulls from his observations and conversations over the past several months, as well as the recent 2020 401k participant survey they recently completed. We covered everything you would expect us to. Some of the information and data is as you would expect, others aren't. If we missed anything, please let me know. Shoot me an email to feedback@401kfridays.com or send me a note on LinkedIn. That's it. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Nathan. Well, Nathan, welcome back to the podcast. Good to have an opportunity to chat with you again, and can't wait to hear what you have to say today about the impact of COVID and the pandemic and market volatility on 401k participant behavior.
Yeah, thanks for having me back, Rick, and glad to be here. And it's a very timely and important topic these days.
Yeah, and I guess speaking of timely, as you know, as we sit here today, if you look out at the markets and you look at sort of where things were prior to the pandemic and everything, we're basically right back there. So I guess if you were in a bubble and you got into that bubble 6 months ago and popped out of that bubble today, you're like, what's the big deal? Everything's kind of the same, at least as it relates to the market. But obviously, there's a lot of businesses, there's a lot of employees, the economy is now incredibly different. I'll spare you some of the details on maybe what's happened, but from a market or economy standpoint. But what's your sense on how people in 401ks or 401k plans have been impacted or have responded during this time period?
Yeah, you're right. If you measure success by S&P 500 returns, I think we're at year to date, we're flat today. And so that tells one story. Yeah, there's been a lot of activity in the 401k space, but I will say, I feel like the 401k space has weathered pretty well. Certainly volumes are up in areas where people need help, so loans and distributions, financial coach conversations, all those kinds of things. People are more in tune with their finances right now because of the pandemic. But by and large, we're still seeing folks making positive changes versus ones that might impact their retirement long term. So the percentages are up, but I would say overall, the 401k space has really weathered this well, considering what's going on around us.
Yeah, and I guess as I think about what you're saying there, and just think about some of the conversations or observations I've had from groups that I work with, I feel like if you made no changes, your contributions weren't impacted because your job was not impacted by COVID, or you didn't have a spouse that was impacted either, by getting sick or, maybe losing their job or being furloughed or having a big change to their income. And if you had I'm using air quotes here, an appropriate investment allocation prior, and you kind of stuck with that, again, you're probably just fine, maybe even better than you were before. But that makes a lot of assumptions that things kind of broke your way, or you had some good fortune during this whole time period to either not be impacted, not make poor financial decisions, not get spooked out of some of your investment allocations or other decisions that you've made over the years. But I'm guessing that's a portion of the population. And then we've got another portion of the population in 401ks that there was some variable in their life that caused them to do something differently. And my guess is that changed their outcome. Am I thinking about that? Or am I guess maybe framing this right?
Yeah, I think you are. I think the way I think about it, I sort of philosophically have three buckets right now. One is the employer is chugging along and the 401k is the same. You've got maybe that middle group where maybe the company is struggling. So maybe there's been a reduction in match contributions or a freeze in the match, but you're still employed, you're still contributing, you're just not getting that company match. And then you have that third bucket of folks that have really been impacted, where they've been furloughed or terminated, where they've had financial hardship individually, and they've had to take loans and distributions and are really in a crisis mode, where they sometimes that 401k is the last thing on your mind in those kinds of situations. And so you have those three buckets. I will say all of those people are calling us, and they're all using our mobile app and our website in an increased way. And so when we have conversations with people, regardless of what bucket they're in, often positive things happen. Even in crisis mode, we can rebalance a portfolio or increase its savings rate, even if the company match has been frozen, or walk through a financial coach conversation and learn about emergency savings accounts. Those kinds of things, regardless of what your situation is. You might be calling because you're panicked. But I think one of the great things about, being a financial coach and having that role is that you can pivot people and turn that into something that's positive and help them make some financial goals and try to stay calm and look forward.
I like your buckets there. And quite frankly, I hadn't thought about it that way. So I think that's a really interesting way to think about it. Do you have any sense for, if you're looking at some of the data that you guys have internally, or some of the analysis you've done on calls or employer decisions, et cetera? I mean, we get this question a ton from other employers, like, hey, how are other employers handling 401k? And, are other employers suspending matches or profit sharing contributions, or are other employers doing, what are they looking at in terms of terminations or layoffs or whatever the case is? So as you think about those three buckets that you laid out, do you get a sense for what percentage of your client base might fall into one of those three buckets?
That's a tough to bucket the three, but I can say this: in terms of freezing or lowering or suspending match contributions, taking sort of plan design actions, that number is still below 10%. Probably conversations have increased, but actually those taking action have still been pretty reasonable. Certainly higher than historically, but still under 10%. And so we are experiencing a little bit more of that. But by and large, our client base, our 401k plan sponsors are continuing as they have historically. One of the things that I think we approached a little differently, so if you think about all those CARES Act relief components, one of the things that we did, I think a little bit differently than some of our competitors, is when we were looking at that package, we talked to consultants and sponsors, and we decided to do an opt-out approach, where we allowed the sponsor and the consultant to take no action. And if they didn't do that, then all of those provisions would go into place. And we found that to be really successful, because it allowed the plan sponsor to focus on the day-to-day and what they should be doing in this crisis, and sort of put that in autopilot a bit, and allowed us to really talk to their participants and see if certain components of the CARES Act, like the CRD distributions, made sense for them. And so we had pretty broad adoption because of that opt-out approach of all of those CARES Act provisions.
We've talked about that a little on the podcast, kind of in the height of what was going on with the pandemic and coronavirus and CARES Act. And And I think, yeah, definitely we had two camps out there with the record keepers. Some, obviously, as you just said, were opt out, where it's, hey, if you don't want this, let us know, otherwise they're going in. And then others were opt in. And yeah, we definitely saw, I think the adoption numbers of the CARES Act provisions were in the 40s for people that had to physically opt into the CARES Act provisions. And I think they were 90+% of employers were adopting CARES Act provisions when it was an opt-out type of decision. Is that roughly about the numbers that you guys saw internally?
That is. Yep. We're right in line with that.
Crazy. Just like automatic enrollment, right? 90
right.
plus percent.
That's exactly
just,
right.
It works. I know, as we kind of joked about a little bit, it was like, hey, you know, turnabout's fair play here. You're basically using the same concepts as automatic enrollment and automatic increases and target date defaults on employers with how some record keepers handled the CARES Act. So I guess with that said, though, that's been another big question that we tend to get at pretty much every conversation with employers or plan committees. How many people are taking these CARES Act provisions and using them? What are people doing with regards to distributions or loans? And I'd love just to get a sense for what you're seeing there now that we've got, you know, several months of data available. What does that look like? Has that been worse, better, about what people expected when these were introduced?
Yeah, you know, it's been obviously higher than average, and we're seeing pretty steady volume. So we're still below 5% of the participant base doing any sort of loan or distribution that's CARES related, but we are seeing steady volumes and steady applications, and so it certainly has not dropped back to normal rates, but still less than 5% of the population. It's interesting, you know. I think just like in personal life, you know, some folks had impact right out of the gate. Based upon their industry or their region. And then over time, that has sort of trickled through to other industries and regions across the country. So I think that's what's contributing to sort of the steady rate across versus a steep drop off. And I, you know, we anticipate, you know, if things continue as they are right now, to see that through the end of the year. So, you know, not anticipating any real drop off as people continue to grapple with the crisis, reduced hours, furloughs, terminations, all of those kinds of things.
One thing that got a lot of conversation within employers was, hold on a second, you're asking me to put something in that allows my employees to potentially take up to $100,000 out of their account in either a distribution or a loan. Do you have any information about what the size of these distributions have been, or the size of loans? I guess has that kind of stuck with maybe historical loan and distribution trends, or have we seen larger loans and distributions due to the new CARES Act provisions that, you know, now that this is sort of available and maybe quote unquote a little bit easier to get access to if you've been impacted by COVID, has that, you had those dollars amount gone up?
Yeah, you know, it's larger than average, but it's nowhere near that 100,000. I think people are still looking at these things as a last resort, as they have historically, and so there's no, we don't see any trend of people asking for larger amounts because of the opportunity and because of some of the friendliness of the CARES Act provisions. We still are ultimately seeing people take it based upon what they feel they need to fill the gap. So a slight uptick, but not as meaningful as I think the industry predicted with that $100,000 increase in limits.
No, that's good to hear. I guess if you think about other decisions, other ways that accounts can be impacted, you've got people potentially stopping contributions due to, well, you know, a lot of different reasons, but stopping contributions, changing investment allocations. I know 401ks are usually pretty sticky and there doesn't tend to be a lot of movement back and forth, but did you see a spike in some of those and those types of activities? And does anything stick out to you in terms of what you've seen in the numbers?
Well, yeah. So I'll say a couple of things. You know, if you're taking a loan or distribution, there is a tendency to stop contributing at that time, particularly on the loans, right, where you're using those that monies you would normally contribute almost to pay back the loan, right? And so anybody who's ever run a financial calculator knows that has a pretty big impact. If you're paying back a loan over a multi-year period and you're not contributing, that really impacts when you can retire, frankly, or what your number is going to be. So that's one that we've always known that exists. That's regular loan consultation, financial education kind of topic, but that's sort of coming back to the surface. That's one that we need to be talking more about. The other, on the positive side, is sort of what I talked about earlier, is people are just more in tune. They're more engaged. They have much more refined thought around their financial situation. And so they're calling us, they're using the mobile app, they're using the website, and they are, generally speaking, taking positive action. So we're still seeing, I track the delta between savings rate increases and decreases. It's one of the things I am sort of obsessed about. And we're still seeing positive delta, right? So there are more increases than decreases overall still from a savings rate perspective. We're seeing financial coach and advice conversations, volume is up. We're seeing rebalancing up. So all of those things, financial wellness conversations up. And so when people are engaging, those financial coaches, our customer service reps, all of those folks do their job and they do it well. And they have really great conversations with folks and help make some positive changes too. And so all those things are on the uptick as well, which is always good to see.
And you brought up an interesting point there around financial wellness. And I think prior to all this, financial wellness was, hey, we need something new to put into our benefits package this year. What don't we have? Oh, well, there's this financial wellness thing. I'm being a little pejorative there, but I know there's certainly been some great efforts by some employers and some business and some providers out there. But I think in terms of the main consciousness in small to mid-sized businesses, I think financial wellness has been something that has been maybe a little bit more of a, let's check the box and do something to add that into the mix. But my sense is that certainly with businesses that have been impacted or where they've had to do layoffs or furloughs, and now they're sort of coming back or kind of stabilizing, I think a lot of people are much more in tuned at the business level or at the leadership level within their businesses to say, you know what, we need to provide some more support, some more education, some more tools or resources for our employees to get a better handle on their financial lives. And, hey, it's great that we offer a 401k, but I think one thing that this pandemic has helped some people realize at the leadership level in a lot of businesses is that that's just one small piece of people's financial lives. And there's a lot more they can be doing to kind of help people feel more secure and a little more resilient in their financial lives through some basic tools and education. So, sorry, that was kind of a long statement, but I guess, what are you seeing out there? Are you seeing more employers kind of move in that direction? Are you seeing more employees ask for help other than just, hey, did I pick the right investments in my 401k plan?
Yeah, my background. I think I may have lived in financial wellness world longer than most. And so I'm seeing a couple things that I think is really interesting and I'm excited about. I think that first wave of financial wellness was, let's build a tool and let's solve these things, or let's have a aggregation type of approach where we're helping people spend in the grocery line. And so big wave of fintech tools that were beautiful, but by and large didn't really work, and there wasn't a ton of take up. I'm seeing now, I think that maturing and coming back to just the basic concept of planning. And, planning doesn't mean I need a full-blown comprehensive financial plan. It can sort of mean whatever it needs to mean to the individual. But that's really what we're talking about. Financial wellness is just another name for planning. It is, what is your situation? What are your goals? How can I help you achieve those? And that could be open up a checking account. That could be start an emergency savings account. That could be explore alternatives to taking a distribution in your 401k because you've had reduced hours. On the other end of that spectrum, full-blown financial plan, right? Estate planning, insurance planning, all those kinds of things. So I think more and more pivoting back a little bit to really what the objective is to help people build a plan and to be engaged. We know that works. It's always going to work. And so a little less tool and bell and whistle centric and a little bit more back to the basics. The great combination of digital and human and helping people achieve their objectives. That's really what we're trying to do day in, day out. You can call that wellness. You can call it planning. You can call it 401k optimization, whatever you want to call it. But at the end of the day, we're all sort of saying the same thing.
Do you get the sense that whether it's now or whether it's as we look into 2021, that will become a bigger demand or focus of employers in whether it's just communicating retirement or financial benefits as part of the overall package that they offer to their employees?
I do. In fact, I think it really becomes table stakes. If you're evaluating a record keeper, you're more often evaluating them not on their ability to optimize a 401k, but their ability to engage your participants to solve all the problems and help people reach their goals. A lot of that is outside of the scope of what you would consider 401k record keeping. And so I think it's very quickly becoming table stakes. And people don't silo their 401k from their other financial concerns. We really shouldn't be doing that either.
Yeah. And I guess that leads me to another question of, I've seen some interesting news clips or headlines just talking about levels of stress during all of this and whether it's just due to obviously very tangible things like job loss, reduced hours, income, debt, whatever. And then I think there's also some other pretty troubling stats out there right now just about how the quarantines and how everything else has kind of been impacting people. I guess what's your sense for the level of financial stress that's out there as it relates to all of the things that the country's been dealing with over the last 6 months?
Sure. It's certainly up. We do a couple things. Obviously, we're constantly talking to our clients on the record keeping side. We also publish a 401k participant survey. That's a survey of across the country 401k participants that aren't necessarily Schwab clients. So it's 1,000 people. We ask them all kinds of questions about their finances. These are people that are actively contributing to their 401ks. So it's a subset. So for us to really get into the minds of what 401k users are thinking. And we usually ask that financial stress question. So I can give you some context. I think last year we asked about the top drivers to stress. And, the largest source is, am I going to have enough for retirement? So a comfortable retirement. That's up 5%. So that was 38% last year, up to 44% this year. And so definitely that's a bigger stress. That survey was published a couple months ago when market volatility was not where it is today. And so obviously those questions are very tied to the market. But other significant signs of stress was volatility, as well as job security. That was 25% up from 19 the year prior. So job security, financial security in retirement, those stressors have gone up based upon the surveys that we do, as well as what our clients are telling us.
So if I'm an employer and I see that or I sense that within my workforce, does that lead us just right back to the financial wellness conversation, or are there other tools or financial tools or resources that an employer should be thinking about or kind of checking their inventory internally as to whether or not they're offering or providing these to their employees?
Yeah, I think it's twofold. I think one is it does tilt back to that planning and wellness conversation. So how can the plan sponsor and the consultant and the record keeper partner to drive engagement? How do we get people to have an advice consultation or talk to a financial coach? Because we know that outcomes are positive, stress goes down when those conversations occur. So how do we do that together? And then the other is it's never a bad idea to look at plan design. Right? Are there things that you can do to incent contributions to make certain things easier or harder that would, move the needle a bit. So, certainly plan design as well as just those behavioral components, those combined can create some positive outcomes.
If I pivot you a little bit back to some of the data that you all have collected, and looking back at that group maybe that didn't have as smooth of a ride during the market volatility or the pandemic, you mentioned good news is, the distributions were not, we didn't see the volume that maybe some were expecting or fearing. Are there some other stats that are, I guess, encouraging or maybe are a little better than we anticipated, or whether it's how many people changed investment options, or I don't know. What did you see in your numbers that might kind of give us a, hey, maybe this whole 401k thing is doing okay, in light of the pandemic and the market volatility?
Yeah, outside of the distribution side, and I hate to paint that as a negative, because the reality is a lot of folks needed that. That was a hole that needed to be filled, a gap that needed to be filled. And the CARES Act provided that relief, which was a great thing and continues to be a great thing. But even the folks that are doing that are having those positive conversations. So all of those other actions, we have seen upticks in volumes there. The one thing I will note, in the survey that we conducted, the positive action. Or so if you work with a professional, so let's say you were working with a financial coach or an advice consultant, the percentage of folks that took action was higher. Sort of goes back to that same story, right? Is that engaged participants, folks that are talking to a professional, that are using the resources available, tend to make positive changes in terms of rebalancing, savings rate increases, updating your beneficiaries, all those kinds of things that we try to get folks to do when they're leveraging the resources.
I'm guessing that as we look out into the future, this is probably not going to be the last time we see some market volatility. This also might not be the last time we see some type of broader existential event or pandemic that no one foresees coming, or no one can really fully control. Have we learned anything, or are there any things that employers or employees or savers in 401k plans can kind of put in their memory banks and use as a situation like this materializes or presents itself in the future?
Yeah, I would say two things. One is, I think this reminded us that 401ks work. The work that we're doing, helping participants one-on-one, whether that's through a website, mobile app, in person, over the phone, it works. When people engage and when we can figure out how to get people actively involved in a plan or in saving for their retirement, saving for the future, it works. So that's one. So I think that resiliency of the 401k, I think this has displayed that rather well. The other thing I would say that maybe we're not talking enough about is access to a 401k to begin with, right? Depending on what survey you read, anywhere from 35 to 50% of working adult Americans don't have access to a 401k. And so just the fact that you were able to take a CRD distribution means that you're one of the lucky people that actually have been able to have access and contribute to a 401k as a working adult. And so that, I think this has shown a light on that as well, that we really, we talk about it a lot, but we really need to figure out how to get access to everyone.
And that's a great point. And that's something that we chatted about a couple weeks ago on the podcast with Lisa Messena, just talking about retirement security in the U.S. and specifically what some of the state plans are doing to help more employers or encourage or mandate more employers to provide some type of option for their employees to save via payroll deduction. So I think there's certainly some good things happening there. And I think, as we also have talked about on another episode, just kind of dove into the MEP and PEP conversation, which I think that also, in my opinion, the jury's out on how much that will actually impact coverage, which is obviously kind of getting more people access to retirement plans. But I think that's a really good point. And I think that in a lot of the 401k data, there's obviously a lot of good things that have happened, but I think there's also been a lot of significant impact to people's financial lives out there. And to your point, if people don't have access to a plan today, or aren't saving today, whether that's by choice or whether that's by lack of access through the workplace, I think a lot of those people that have been in roles that, or been at companies that might not be, as historically likely to offer a 401k, I think there's probably some additional hurdles or roadblocks that they face right now to move or even get on the path to starting to save for retirement.
Oh, agreed. Absolutely.
So I guess in thinking about, maybe one or two parting shots, is there, I guess if you look back in the data for a minute, what surprised you one way or the other? Either, wow, I didn't think people were going to be this resilient on X, or wow, we had more people do Y maybe than we'd anticipated or would have anticipated, as we look back on just the magnitude of some of this, the market volatility and everything else that surrounded the last 6 months of our lives here as we've sort of lived through this pandemic and COVID.
Yeah, I think the one thing, and several things, but that's one that really jumped out at me and continues to do so, is that embedded in this crisis, this pandemic, people have really taken stock of where they are. And so much more informed, or at least have a desire to be much more informed about what their situation is today and what they need to do correctly, or what their goals should and could be. So just a bigger desire at the individual level to be a bit more engaged, to be a little bit more knowledgeable, to take some positive steps, to develop their plan, whatever that might look like. And I think that will trickle through and have positive outcomes for a while. So that's really brought people to center a bit and a little bit more knowledgeable about where they stand.
Well, I'm with you. I mean, I think if, as a result of this, people are a little bit more in tune and understanding of either what they are or aren't doing in their financial lives, I think that despite obviously the chaos that has been wreaked on a lot of people's lives and the economy, if we do have a little bit more engaged and in tune workforce that is thinking a little bit more purposefully about what they're doing with their money and how that translates to retirement, then maybe that's one of the lights that has kind of emerged from all of this, and maybe that pays dividends for a lot of people down the road.
Yeah, I'm hopeful that that's true.
So Nathan, I appreciate your time, and thanks for all the work that you guys did in sort of looking at the numbers and looking at the data. And certainly, as we look at other topics like this, would love to have you back again.
Absolutely. Always look forward to chatting. Thanks again, Rick.
And there you have it. Nathan Voris, Managing Director with Charles Schwab Retirement Plan Services. Good stuff as always. That's it for today. Until next time, I hope you make your Friday a 401k Friday. And now for some disclosures. The content in this podcast is provided for educational and discussion purposes only. Investing involves risk, including a potential loss of investment. Lockton does not and cannot guarantee the future performance or specific level of performance, the success of any investment, or success of any strategy. Nothing contained herein may be construed as investment or legal advice.